Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Strength Game Podcast. I'm your host, Nick O'Brien, and this is episode number 1. The Strength Game is a weekly podcast dedicated to discussing all things physical culture with the coaches, athletes, iron enthusiasts, and experts deeply embedded in the strength game on both sides of the profession, both as coaches and as competitive athletes. I want to thank those of you who have liked, shared, and commented. Your support continues to let us bring on more experts and highlight more individuals in the strength game, just like our guest today. In this week's episode, I'm joined by a good friend of mine and fellow S&C colleague, Dave Terry. Coach Terry is the director of sports performance at Georgetown University, where he oversees the football, track and field program, as well as the rowers. Dave has worked his way up from a volunteer all the way to a director position with the Hoyas, and so it's only fitting he's also running the intern-mentorship program there as well. He's a former high school strength coach and personal trainer in the private sector, also a former competitive bodybuilder. He's been now competing in the USAPL powerlifting since 2016. I'm excited to have him on the episode today. So without that said, let's get into the game with Coach Dave Terry. Hey, so welcome. I'm here today with Coach Dave Terry, the Director of Sports Performance at Georgetown University. Dave is a good friend of mine. We were in two passing ships at Georgetown, and now he's kind of the head cheese there. So, hey, it's great to have you on the show, man.
Dude, thanks for having me. I wouldn't say I was head cheese. He'll still sees everything with an iron fist. But yeah, man, it's been cool getting to know all the Iron Hoya alum. Nick is one of the dudes that just shows up unannounced every once in a while, and you get to lift stones and be meatheads a little bit.
That's awesome. So I know you've been there for a long time now, and you kind of climbed the ladder and worked your way up through Georgetown, but kind of go through, we already told the audience a little bit about your history and everything. Go talk a little bit more about how you kind of got involved in sports, like what you did growing up, and then how you got to this point where you're now powerlifting and you're competing at a high level.
Right. So, like most people, I played football in high school, and then I ended up getting under. So a coach basically came and retired at our high school, but he was a high-level collegiate coach. He actually coached at Georgetown a little bit right before he came back to Michigan. So I played for him, and then I ended up going to community college for 2 years, and he invited me back to start coaching, and that's when I realized I really liked coaching. Granted, I was a football coach, not a strength coach, but I really just enjoyed it. So during that time as well was a time when I was sitting there in community college, not doing anything worthwhile besides like coaching, but I watched Rocky and decided the next day I was going to go back to the Y and start lifting and everything again. So those kind of started together. You sit there, after practice, you're watching movies and stuff, realizing you're wasting time, get back in the gym. And then I started getting into bodybuilding, and things like that during college. So I stopped coaching after 2 years and then went away to school. And that's when I started taking competitive bodybuilding a little more seriously. Competed in that in college. And then, so 2 years, that's what 2 years I did that for, and then got my Mr. Natural West Michigan trophy, and then right after that, literally like 3 weeks after I jumped off stage with that, was my time to take an internship at Georgetown. So I took a summer internship. It was supposed to be 3 months, and I was going to move back to Grand Rapids and run like fit body boot camps because I really didn't know strength conditioning actually existed. So I was like, oh yeah, we'll see what this is. When I got out to Georgetown, Carl Johnson, at that time, it was like the USAW national champion for his division. So kind of the training was something I really liked. The hard work with that was something I really identified with. And then just learning how to train athletes under him was super interesting. So it kind of sparked that fire. So I was there for 3 months, and then they offered me the full-time internship. So I was the head of the high school, as well as still working with some teams at Georgetown. And then just kind of right after that position ended next year. So that's August 2014. Ended up getting bring on full-time for women's basketball, baseball, softball. The hell else was I with? Field hockey, sailing was all the teams I had. And then 3 years after that was Chris Tolsman left. So I ended up hopping in the head football role. And then now last year got named director last summer. So it's been a whirlwind, man. It's been fun.
Yeah, so that I knew once you got to Georgetown exactly kind of how the journey went and all the different roles you went in. And basically you worked, or at least in some part helped with every single team at Georgetown. So you have some experience that other coaches never get, being able to touch almost every single sport and know even what the difference between a sailing athlete needs and a football player, which is awesome. What's kind of one of the biggest lessons you learned from all that, working in that with such variety of sports, and what kind of advantages does that give you now as the director?
And I'd say the toolbox. Like, you have to have a well-rounded toolbox in there. You know, I know that's I feel like that's a cliche coaching term, but like, you know, am I going to always clean every single athlete I have? Like, I've got a general template of how I'm going to train everybody and how it ebbs, like I might regress, or progress different movements depending on the teams. But really, it's, you know, going in and saying, hey, like, you know, women's rowing, what are our actual needs here, and how am I going to train them? Am I going to use, you know, what tools I'm going to use, being able to throw that out there, then go to football, and then go to, like, one thing that was really interesting for me when I dove into sailing training is it was eerily similar to like how I would program to an Olympic lifter, which threw me off because I didn't expect that. So some of our high levels were, you know, on a 4-day split, they would come in on their own, and it was just, you know, like I was training the Olympic weightlifting club. Very, very similar programs, just a little bit,
Right.
Some subtleties in the warm up and and some accessory work, but everything else was the same. And plus, I mean, they ate that up. They ended up coming, those high level sailors ended up coming to our Donnie Shankle seminar. So like, it was kind of cool.
Nice. I'm
But
jealous.
yeah, like, it's just been cool working with the different personalities too. I feel like that helps develop you as a coach. Because, you know, going from football right to women's rowing, you can't speak to them in the same manner to stay motivated, you know. But and I think that's what makes coaching fun, is because I can have that balance of going from, you know, football, the women's rowing, to, you know, track and field, which is all three completely different, like, energies, if you will, of athlete, because just the nature of the sport. It's just been fun. And I'd say, like, you know, there's some teams that I had a ton of fun with, and there's some teams where I struggled to, like, figure out how the hell to connect with the athlete, you know,
Right.
because the culture of the sport was different or something. You know, like, when I first got out to Georgetown, Coach Michael Hill was like, you want field hockey? And I was like, what the hell is field hockey? You know, I'd never seen the sport before. You know, it was something we played in gym class with hockey sticks and a ball. And then we get there and I'm like, okay, so I had to learn a whole new sport. So that's something I really struggled with, is my first year in coaching, is figuring out what field hockey was and how to train for that sport. So I think, you know, having all those sports, you're always learning different cultures in sport and all that. And it's been, I think, great for developing as a coach, but also, like, even as a powerlifting athlete, being able to understand how and take tidbits of how each of these, you know, sports prepare for training, and you kind of start to apply that to your training, which has been interesting.
Yeah, that's a great thing. That's actually the next point I kind of wanted to touch on. Like, since you've been able to been indoctrinated to all these different sports and see what field hockey does completely different than tennis, or what tennis does different than lacrosse, whatever it ends up being, like, they've had a lot of influence. You've had a lot of influence from them, but with your own specific training, what have you been able to take away from them that have helped you with your own personal powerlifting and your training now?
I mean, the top two that stand out is like probably women's rowing, like learning from those women and how they view their training is like consistency, like, oh, this is going to suck, but I got to do it, or like, so like a lot of that has helped on those days where you're like, I don't want to do this. Like, I feel like crap. I didn't sleep, but then like you kind of still get under the bar. And kind of that culture that they have is like they go out on the water at 6 a.m. It's raining, it's gross, but like screw it, we're out here. So I think that, especially because we had a little barbell club, like our little group of coaches all trained together every day. So like we would just go through it together, and some days are going to be good. And so like kind of that mentality that, we all think about, but really kind of having to embrace it. But then also with them is like kind of always being down. So like there'd be some days the girls would be like, Coach, can you want to row a 2K with us? Like, we'd really appreciate it. And you're like, all right, ladies. Like, and so just being able to hop in and like kind of always maintaining that level of like competition in your head. And granted, I'm competing with, some of my athletes, but it's just kind of fun to be able to hop in and compete at all times. So be able to flip that switch and be like ready to go. And then, from the typical football and everything, all the other sports is just that accountability, the team sports. Being able to hold each other accountable with our barbell club. But I'd probably say like the biggest learning curve for me lately has been with women's rowing, just because that culture is, I feel like it goes hand in hand with the competitive lifter if you're going to maintain that high level,
Yeah. Yeah, the culture's huge. I think that's one thing that people don't touch on, and with the barbell club. And I remember one of the biggest things that I remember about being at Georgetown, like before you got there, when I was an intern, was the staff lifts, and just Carl and Hill and Sean and Trevor and everybody, the time between when the athletes weren't there or when the stragglers, when they're in there, like the culture of those guys either pushing one single athlete or fellow sport coaches being in there, or the fellow interns I had with there, the atmosphere was huge. Since you guys have so many sports in there at a time, and you guys have such an in-depth intern mentorship program, like how is that culture? How do you kind of cultivate that with your new interns coming in and making sure that they come in and breathe that same atmosphere that you want and that culture?
Right. So I think we get real deep real quick. Like the first day, I ask why you're here. And they kind of have some time to prepare an answer, I guess, but like, why are you here? So kind of when you start to open people up very early and say, hey, this is a comfortable environment to fail. Because I'm going to fail. Everyone's going to fail, but we got to try to fail forward, and kind of setting that tone. People are a lot more open to training hard and start to be open to that culture because they see how it breeds success. At least I hope they do. So I think the first thing we do, but then the other thing too is like, especially during our summer internships where it's a little bit more like we've got so much time to train, I always make sure like it pushes me a little bit more to be like, all right, like I'm going to run this conditioning packet too. Like, you guys want to hop in and like just do the things that I don't really want to do, but I know I probably should do. Sort of lead that by example. And then you kind of have everyone kind of falls in because they assume that this is the expectation. Because that was the funny thing I learned when I took over football, is coming from the sport of powerlifting, like seeing a 500-pound squat, like I wasn't impressed. I was like, hey, good job. Like, all right, cool. Rather than be like, oh my goodness, a 400 or 500-pound squat, that's
Right.
great. And they were no longer impressed by like that stuff. So it kept kind of pushing like, oh, like 500-pound squat, cool. That's like a benchmark, whatever, moving on. So it's the same thing with cultivating that culture. It's like, it's the expectation to train hard, and anything below that is unacceptable. Just for your one self to be like a human being, you need to train hard, you need to push yourself. Like, hell, yesterday I ran 2 miles at like a 7:49 pace, which is insane for me. And plus it was uphill. Like we were in Rosslyn, I was running a freaking hill for the first mile. But yeah, I think cultivating that culture is just kind of leading by example. But then like, in our downtime when we're sitting there eating lunch or whatever, like I'll throw, this I took from Carl. So little backstory about this, but like, so Carl would invite me over and we would sit there and like watch old West Side videos or all the old Iron Mind like VHSs that he transferred DVDs. So we watched the Unbelievable Bulgarians. We watched like the Pocket Hercules, and like watch these old training hall videos over and over again so I could learn to like develop an eye. And I think he just enjoyed watching them too because they're pretty fun to watch Olympic lifting. So then like now in the internship, but mostly in the summer, but sometimes like when we have teams, when we have some downtime, I like to watch like the old Cal Strength videos, the old Iron Mind videos while I eat.
Yeah.
And so like them watching that and being like, who's John North? Who's Donnie Shankle? Who's Spencer Mormon? You know, or like, who's this guy? I'm like, oh, that's, you know, like Piros, you know, and them being able to see these old lifters and see how they train and like also see like this random dude just sitting there watching weightlifting. Because that's something I always watched Carl before he would train. He'd watch the weightlifters train. And for me, that helps me get in my mindset too, of like watching other people train and seeing their focus, see how they approach the bar. And I think for them, I try to make sure they see that is like, hey, how you approach the bar is everything. Like those little details of like how you do anything is everything. But like that was something that when Donnie Shankle came out, he kind of reiterated and kind of ingrained in my head is like, every time I approach the bar, I need to do it the same way. So that way when I go for these heavy attempts or competition, everything's the same, right? So like I step from the right side of the platform, I approach, I grab the bar. You know, the way I do everything is always the same, so I don't have to think about it, and I just get set. And so those little details I want them to hop on because then they start focusing and then like their feelings start to matter less. You know, like, oh, I don't feel like, well, you still just got to go through it, you know? Yeah. So like just kind of making sure they're exposed to hard training, expectations. You're not impressed by the minimum anymore. I mean, we've had people come through the internship, like PT students that have never trained before. So like we're doing the exercise. They walk and I'm like, hey, you can quit. And they're like, no, I'm going to finish. I just can't move well right now. I'm shaking. I'm like, all right. Like, cool.
That's awesome. I have the same thing. Andy Deck and I, we have an old YouTube playlist. It's called Shankle North 2012. And it's kind of the pump up list. So every time we're just not feeling it that day, we've got the same thing. Here's some of the classic Cal Strength videos, and I've been adding through it through the years, and it's awesome because their approach to it is huge. And I think especially when you bring in interns like you said that are PTs, or because you guys bring in some ones from just all walks of life. I remember you brought some guy in that was so heavily involved in karate or something, but had never really touched a barbell. That's crazy. So to have them start to get involved in actual training and strength conditioning that they're going to see if they want to be a coach is huge. Kind of speaking on that, I know that your guys' internship, that mentorship program is pretty unique. Will you touch on that a little bit and some of the importance of why you guys harp on making sure that those interns are training and getting used to the program, and just like you were doing, hopping in with the athletes on some days or getting excited for stuff, but understanding that maybe a 500 squat is just a benchmark. Like that's the standard. So we shouldn't be so excited. But why is training so important with your internship program?
Ooh, I mean, the number one thing, you're like your mindset when you approach coaching is everything. Like, because it's going to be, every interaction is going to be influenced by your mindset. And I think when you're training, specifically, like even when you're trained to be competitive, your mindset is so much more, I mean, maybe aggressive. So you want to have that mindset of like, I need to push myself, so I'm going to push these athletes. And you start to hold them to a higher standard, right? I remember after the New York Raw championships, I went up and I got red lighted on a PR squat because like my left hip didn't go low enough. So that fall, every football squat was like USAPL 3 white lights because I was pissed for like months after that because like I really wanted that squat and they red lighted me because my left hip. And that just, it lights those little like things that are in our heads as competitive lifters that drive us nuts. You know, that give you a little twinkle in your eye and the laugh on your PR squats that you sound like a crazy person. Like those little things drive you as a coach to be a better coach, to learn how to understand that stuff, to never have that happen to you or your athlete again. where those little things that maybe you just ignored in training or didn't pay attention to came up and affected you in competition, because they're competing. They kind of have that mindset, but they're younger than us. So we have to mentor it a little bit. Hey, when I was in training, maybe some days I didn't do my mobility, or I didn't take that PR squat heavy all the way down. Like, you guys have to, because that's preparation for your field or when you're in your boat or whatever. We have to pay attention to details, because everything comes to light. So I think training as a coach, you have to, like, there's no excuse not to, because you have to understand the intricacies of it. Like when you're talking like to an athlete that's about to take 500 for a set of 10, like, oh, coach, what do you want me to think about? I go, I just want you to get pissed and everything's your air. You're going to do 5 reps. You're going to completely reset, your mind, because you have to fight for 3 and then you have 2. You're not going to do a set of 10. Your air is everything on those last 5 reps, because if you don't have a good air, you're falling forward, you're missing the squat, And if I wasn't training and going for, my PR is 505, I was so stoked when I got it, but it was all my air. And that's all I had focused on. So I was able, now I can guide people down that way when I'm training at those higher level percentages. Like, hey, here's all you need to focus on, rather than like, all right, we're going to breathe in through our nose. Screw that. Just get some air in you and don't miss forward, because that's going to be the only way, judging by your squat, that we're going to miss it or something, So you get a little bit more in the trenches, but then the mindset is huge. But I'd say those are the main 2 things that I can think of off the top of my head,
No, that's big. I think that's important. And being able to take some of those mishaps or faults from you and be able to make sure that your athletes aren't making the same mistakes is huge. And yeah, they probably were USAPL, like, perfect depth squats for the whole semester. But I think that when those athletes start to realize that, hey, these little things are important, and how you do one thing is how you do everything. So if you're going to mess up on this, and you're going to try to skate away with an inch here, what are you going to do when the game's on the line? Which is, that's why training, I think, is so important. So kind of with your internship stuff and the training the athletes, what would be some advice for some incoming interns of yours, or anybody that's kind of first getting started in strength conditioning as a career?
The same thing that I try to echo is, like, get out and train with people. I don't know how we're going to do it anymore with this coronavirus, but get out and train with people. If you can, go get tested and go train with them. I don't know. But, like, just get out and train with people, because that's been how I've been able to build relationships, and that's how I like to get to know people, because I can see what you're made of real quick. Like, when we do – so normally when I have people come by and train, because, like, at the end of the Virginia State Clinic, I was like, hey, come on by whenever you want to train. Like, we'd love to train with you. So I'd have people come over for, like, oh, I want an internship. All right. This is the same thing that Carl kind of did too, and like Hill did, where you come in and you lift as far as your interview, So we'd come in, we'd squat, and I'd kind of see, like, how serious you took training, like, were you strong? But usually just be like effort. And then I'd go over and I'd get the sandstones, and we would do 90 seconds, as many reps as possible, like we do in the strongman competitions, the sandstones. And we'll for the small, like, the weak people, will do the 100-pound or whatever, but I hop in there and we go, and I just see how you handle that. And so I think a lot of it is like, hey, just, if you want to be a strength coach, you got to want it bad. And that should be your attitude towards, like, training and everything like that. So that's something that I evaluate. So there goes my secret for job interviews. If you want an internship, just do well on the sandstones. But then just a good person. Yeah, I'd say, training hard teaches you a lot what you need to be a strength coach, because you got to read the books, you got to work long hours, you got to show up for athletes. And I think training hard and in a training group is huge. Like you had, I know, like, when you and Andy would train, I'd always hear stories about that. But even like when Andy comes to visit, like, training goes to a different level, so always try to be that person that when you show up to train with an interview, like, try to have your, like, work ethic show. And then just read on your own. Don't expect me to be like, hey, here's what we're going over today. Like, my internship is all about teaching you how to coach and interact with athletes, because that's what you get. You get thrown and you have to interact with athletes. Hey, what weight do you have today? Okay, I'm going to load it on the bar, and then I expect you to read the book list on your own, so that way we can discuss it, you know. So number one, train hard. Number two, learn as much as you can from everything. And that's something that I've learned a lot at Georgetown, is like, we bring in people that have never had strength conditioning, but we can take like the karate guy. We can learn a lot from him, because he doesn't necessarily, but he can start relating things from, you know, when we read the system, or when we start reading different books about strength conditioning, he can start relating and bringing a different perspective in. And I think as coaches, the more perspectives that we can get helps us be more effective with each athlete, because we have, you know, for me, I have 300 some odd athletes, and like, I got to have as much perspective as I could possibly get to be able to properly coach and interact and have a positive interaction with each athlete. Because if I went, you know, every single athlete like I do the football team specifically, if I went every athlete like I do the D-line, I would be an ineffective coach, you know, because like, I get along with those guys. We get each other. We're very similar, but like, I can't go to the receivers the same way as I do the D-line.
Right.
Or like go to tennis, you know. So it's just one of those things. The more perspectives we can get as a coach, you're going to be better. So the internship, I try to bring in a well-rounded group from PTs, personal trainers, to strength coaches that all kind of want to be, because I also feel like as a strength coach, if I have the ability to kind of shape the way fitness is even looked at in my city, like, I want people to freaking train hard. So if I can bring a personal trainer in and be like, stop with the gimmicky crap, like, let's get some people some results, I feel like I can impact the world a little bit too, but also them bringing in their perspective of personal training. So again, number one, perspectives, train hard, like all that. Like, yeah.
I love that. That's I think when you have the ability to bring in more people, it opens your eyes to a lot of stuff, because otherwise you kind of see when people just pass stuff down, especially in like the track and field or some of those old professions where it's almost just bastardized and passed down, and you add like just your own little flair on it, and you don't really see what other people are doing, and getting a flair for other people. But surrounding yourself with like-minded people that at least like to train and that are passionate about what they do, if they bring a different perspective and they bring something to the table, you guys are helping each other out, which is huge. And you kind of touched on it a little bit when you were talking about your book lists and everything for the interns, and your recommended reading everything. What are some of your favorite resources for training and for coaching for those guys?
I mean, we start with a lot of elite FTS articles, getting started, because there's a lot of gold in there, like what to expect from an internship, what to expect from an intern coordinator, and just a lot of advice for young coaches. And I mean, really anything that, like, we read a lot of what Hammer writes. So Todd Hammer where he's got Union Fitness now, but he's got a lot of gold mines that on Elite FTS. So we read a lot of his stuff, and then we dive into some books. So Joe Kent's, it's not called the tier system, the Strength Coaches Playbook, right?
Right, yeah.
We dive into that because that one simplifies things. And then it kind of ebbs and flows depending on the internship staff we have. I really like bringing in, you know, odds and ends. So we usually do triphasic every once in a while just to get something a little different in there. Because I think everyone needs to know triphasic. I think everyone needs to know tier system. I think everyone needs to know, you know, velocity-based training. So that way we can kind of learn some different things. But I'd always probably say the top 3 books that we always do is we always do tier system. We always do a Dan John book. Literally any of them. I forget what the last one was, but just because the way he views training, I really think is great for young coaches to understand, you know, because I think you and I might have went to it, the Dan John seminar, where he's like, you got to pick 11 things that are important and do them for a while. It was like basically how to write a GPP, but he's like, it's important, do it every day.
Yeah.
You know? So you're going to do some squat pattern every day with me because squatting is important. You know, it might not be, you know, it might just be in a warm up, but we're going to do that. So that, like, I'd probably say that, and then I'll throw in some random book that I think might just confuse, but also to spark some questions. So again, That really depends on the staff. But I'd probably say we always use Elite FTS articles. We always do Dan John. We always do the Joe Ken, just because the way it simplifies training almost in a way that makes a little bit more sense, I think. So, yeah.
No, I would recommend all those. Those are probably my go-tos as well. I love every article on Elite FTS and all the ones. Hammers are awesome. They're always pretty insightful, and he's definitely not going to filter anything. He'll give you what the profession looks like from his point of view, and he's pretty spot on. And
yeah, that's something I always respected about that is the honesty that you're giving when you like hand him like what is like the 10 things about strength and conditioning that Hammer has on there. It's really honest about the field because of like someone hadn't been honest about me and like, you know, I'm working 7 days a week and I'm like, oh crap, I can't make rent this month, but I'm working freaking 90 hours, you know, the pay, you start to realize like, oh, like I know to expect this because I've had good mentors, but not everyone has access to that. So they jump into the field and they leave after a year and a half, 2 years because they didn't know that. So I think having articles like that, you know, enlightens the interns. We've had a lot of people decide that this wasn't for them, you know, and go back to PT school, which I think was a good idea. But yeah, I think the more honest you can be with your reading material as well.
Yeah, that all the recommended stuff, all the reading material. And that's why I think I love what you guys do with the internship program, because I still think I did, like, you know, I've done 5 internships. So I'm probably a bigger advocate for that rite of passage than anyone. And after doing all those, somehow I ended up continue to stay in this career is beyond me. But I think that's huge. If you don't do an internship and you don't have that rite of passage, and like we kind of say here, our internship should answer 2 things. Like, can you do this? And do you want to do this? Right. And if you can't say yes to both of those when you're done, then you really should get out, because there's a lot of cliches to this profession, but if you can't answer those 2 things, then you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, I think that's something that like internship coordinators, like I really try to make sure I'm asking those questions in different ways, you know, but also inspiring to hopefully like, hey, we do need people to stick around in this field, you know, but like, so taking the kids that the college students that you can tell have a passion, but maybe don't know how to guide it, and be like, hey, here's how we're going to inspire you. And then people like that you're not quite sure, just make sure that you ask them a lot of questions about this to make sure that they're making a decision. Because I feel like it's our duty as internship coordinators to number one, inspire it, but not necessarily to be in strength and conditioning, but inspire like, hey, this is hard work, this is training, take it to PT. We need PTs that understand strength and conditioning more than anything, you know?
Oh, exactly. No, that's huge. So we finished the show here with a finisher, of course, because we're all competitive athletes and coaches, so you got to finish strong with it. So we're going to do 4 quarters, 4 questions, and there might be overtime. So okay. Quick fire. You can elaborate if you want to, but you can keep them as short as you want. You ready?
Let's go.
All right. First one, biggest influence in strength conditioning and biggest influence in powerlifting.
Biggest influence in strength conditioning, I'd probably say Carl Johnson. I mean, he mentored me through a lot, but even just like exposing me to everything that was in strength, him. And in powerlifting, I really like watching the old like powerlifters, you know, Kirk and those guys that like Ed Cohn. I just like watching all the old guys that came before that, like the first pioneers. I watch them on YouTube way too much. So all the old guys, you know, I love watching Kaz videos. You know, love watching Kaz. So I'd probably say Bill Kaz mine because I love watching his stuff because he got so crazy before he lifted.
Oh yeah, for sure. What can you be found doing when you're not coaching or competing? What's your go-to hobbies?
Oh, I cook, man. I cook like a madman. Especially in the summer, I got a smoker, so I've been doing some barbecue lately. You know, like 6-7 hours just sitting out there. I cook a ton. I get out, and I love to eat, and you know, because I eat my training meals, you know, four of them a day, and that last meal a day, that was a treat. So I try to eat well, eat delicious food. So yeah, I love to cook, man. Love to learn about cooking. So I get out, take cooking classes, read books, try to meet chefs. You know, when I go on vacation, I try to, like, I was in Hawaii and I started talking to the chefs, and they took me back and showed me how they do the pigs. You know, you got to be curious,
Nice.
try to learn from people, you know.
Well, this next one's perfect then. If you could set up your perfect and ideal training day, what music or PR song are you listening to?
Ooh.
And what's your post-training meal?
All right. So the songs, I have 3. All right. Number 1, Last Kiss from Last Mohicans. When that little violin gets going,
Okay.
oh, gets the blood pumping. So that song. Then I'd probably say Avalanche, Ghost Inside.
Oh, that's a good one.
Oh, yeah. And then the other one could be, like, there's like a handful of Metallica songs, whatever the mood is. Sometimes it's one, like, but I fast forward a little bit when it gets a little heavier by Metallica. Sometimes it's Saint Anger, and then Sanitarium would be my top 3 Metallica. So that Metallica will just be in its own. So I'd say those are my top 3. And then post-training meal, ooh.
Your go-to, your favorite one.
So after a good session, like, it's probably not nutritionally sound, but after a good session, every Georgetown strength staff member knows the taco truck. I'm going to go see Jesus, and I'm going to go get 4 mixto tacos and 3 carne asada and probably a Coke. I'm going to sit on the side of the road and live my best life. If he's closed or it's raining out, I'm probably just going to stick to a little vertical meal, some rice, some peppers, some beef, cover that in mumbo sauce. If you're in DC, you know what mumbo sauce is. Smother it, move on with life.
All right. If you weren't coaching, what would you be doing? If you could be doing anything, and if you weren't powerlifting, what sport would you be doing if you could be doing anything?
Ooh, if I wasn't coaching, I'd probably try to be like work at a barbecue joint, be like the pit master, whatever that's called, the position's called. Or I love building things. So I started off in construction when I was coaching football. So I'd probably be back in construction. The only reason I really got into coaching was because in like 08, 09, the economy tanked and no one was building houses. So I was like, all right, we'll do coaching, and I ended up falling in love with it. So I'd probably be back in construction. And then what sport if it wasn't powerlifting? I don't know. I'd probably get into like competitive shooting or something. I don't know. I'm just getting now into it. So something where it requires a little more skill and a little less like brute force. I took a combatives class, actually. That'd probably be it. I took a combatives class last 2 weeks ago, and I got my ass kicked. So I'd probably do something like that, like jiu-jitsu or something.
Okay. All right. I guess we'll do overtime.
Oh, I earned overtime? Hell yeah.
Yeah, last one. Most valuable piece of coaching advice or lifting advice you've received, and from who?
Goodness gracious. Consistency. Everything. You got to be consistent. Training, coaching, you got to be consistent. You got to have a high level of consistency. And I think that's every high-level coach and every high-level lifter that I've ever asked for advice. That's what it's boiled down to, is consistency. You have to be a consistent human. You got to be disciplined. So consistency, and everything that you can possibly think of, a high level of consistency, high level energy. And that's something that Carl taught me very early on when I said I didn't drink coffee. And he says every strength coach needs to drink coffee because you need to perform. So, consistency.
Love it. That's awesome. Hey, well, that's everything. Hey, Dave, I really appreciate you coming on, man. It's been awesome getting to know you and following your career and seeing everything that you've put together, like going from an intern to an assistant all the way to now your director role. Like, it's been awesome. It's great to call you a friend, and I really appreciate you coming on for the rest of the Strength Game podcast listeners.
Oh, dude, thanks for having me. It's great chatting a little bit. Good seeing you guys in quarantine. You know, it's good to see your training a little bit. But yeah, man, thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to seeing you once this all dies down a little bit.
For sure. Thanks again, brother.
For sure.
That's it for this episode of The Strength Game. Thank you again to this week's guest and to our sponsors, Cerberus Strength. Be sure to connect and keep up with our guests at the links in the description below. Remember to subscribe to us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider to stay up to date on all future episodes. Also, check us out on YouTube and CoachO'Brien.com, where you can find all the video versions of these episodes, as well as show notes, episode schedule, and much more. Comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome and appreciated. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to join us next week for another great episode of The Strength Game.